Well, good morning. Welcome to the Explicit Measures podcast. We are running a little bit late this morning. Please hold for bumpy air conditions. Buckle up, and we'll figure out the internets. I don't know what it is, but for whatever reason, sometimes the stream works nice and strong, good strong signal. Other times, it just is angry. So after a couple of restarts here, we're back in business. So I hope this is not indicative of the rest of our day, because this could be an interesting morning, evening, day, whatever it's going to be.
Yeah, these are supposed to be the good parts of my day, Mike.
I know.
At some point, it's interesting that with streaming or anything on computers, you join the online meeting.
Yeah.
And there's so many memes and funny things about online meetings, right? Where people, lose track, the connections, all this kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But this morning, it's going to be a slow start, I think, for listeners to join us, because we were about 10 minutes late, and that's usually the cutoff for me in a meeting where people don't
hang around.
I'm like, I'm out.
Nope.
Like, you don't respect my time. That's it.
The fact that there's even one person online, like, fine, so be it. So
yeah, right.
It is what it is, right? Technology. So I don't know why I think things have gotten bumpy for me recently. We had a good run. guys. It was good while it lasted.
Pull it together, Mike. Pull it together.
And kudos to our real fans who actually followed us around this rabbit hole. Actually follow the live stream.
Five different YouTube links later, kind of thing.
Just for you, Kevin.
Yeah.
Happy Tuesday.
There it is.
Don't worry if you're listening to the audio, you have no issues whatsoever.
Exactly. Tommy will make it nice and clean and pretty for you. So
beautiful.
Be happy that you're listening on podcasts.
I guess that's our intro. Should we change from OBS?
Welcome to our podcast.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, with that, let's jump into today's topic today. Tommy, you've got topic today. Give us the runaround on what today's topic is all about.
Yeah, I got the topic. So this is a fun one. It's a little broad, which always makes things interesting for a conversation.
Oh, Michael will rabbit trail for sure.
Oh yeah.
Guaranteed.
If it's not dead Pacific, even if it is, it still goes off. So this is just a perfect one for Mike to go, I want to take this to Tableau.
We're gonna go all over the place.
We're gonna go all the ways. But this came a conversation we, like a lot of it, had offline.
Yep.
But it was really about the user's experience in Power BI report, getting to content, and just basically whose role it is and what should you do to improve someone's experience. And again, thinking as a consumer, we've heard this all the time, and we have
a report consumer, right? Is that
a
what you're saying?
report consumer? Yeah. And Walmart consumer.
Yeah,
anyone who's consuming content in Power BI, the back and forth usually goes, I didn't know where the report is in the conversation. Well, whose fault is that? Is that my fault as a pro?
Ooh.
Or is that the consumer? I saved my bit for too early. I
know
my wild card. Anyways, I'll say it later.
You laid down your cards early.
That was it.
Yeah,
I know.
Dang, we're done.
I showed my ace in the hole.
Yeah.
But that's generally the idea today. And there's a few ways we're going to take this in terms of, I'll save it, but a few ways we're going to take that in terms of that consumer versus the author role and whose job it is and what should we focus on. So with that,
you sound very New York when you say author.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I guess it comes with the growing up thing. So, but
love it. For all of our New York fans, Tommy's got your back.
Happy Tuesday. So I'll leave it at that. And I guess we'll kind of start with, I want to ask you guys, when we say experience,
user experience, report user experience.
Yeah. What comes to mind?
I want to clarify there a bit, just because I think we're all going to come at this with different angles, right? I think Tommy, you mentioned or touched on, how do I get to the report? That's one kind of user experience. I think I'm coming from an area of maybe a little bit of that, but I think I'm more about what did I do when I first built reports, and what do I do now that makes it easier for people to use the reports? So maybe that's kind of where the spin I'm thinking it might be report design. So we could also think about this as portal and desktop, be able to break those out in two different areas. That's kind of how I'm perceiving user experience. What would you quantify your user experience part, Seth? Does that align with what you're thinking, or is there something else you would include in that umbrella of user experience?
Yeah, I don't really think about it in terms of like the build. So it'll be interesting to hear what you have to say about that.
What I make up about that? Yeah, sure.
The things that come to mind, and we're obviously speaking from experience, right? Is data quality. how do we instill and keep confidence in end user experiences, right? Because what they see in the report, they don't always understand how you went about building it.
Yep.
Um, and there's ways you can focus on in improving that experience across the board in the report itself. I get the things I would say that I rarely get to, right? Like click paths. Like how do you interact with the data?
Hmm.
Does it make sense when um, you're engaging with a report? Maybe that's some of the survey or watching somebody use the report, or are they using it the way you think they would?
Hmm.
And then I think there's always area for improvement in visuals, right? Like highlight, key insights, or is there a way to make a page of the key insights that people are always drilling into, right? And refine how you present the information. And I think Power BI does a fantastic job in terms of, I can always stick a bar chart on, but could I build a custom visual? Or could I use a custom visual?
Hmm.
Or could I create a custom page that highlights these big things, because that based on user metrics, I'm going to make some adjustments. So those are kind of the things that come top of mind for me.
I like those thoughts. I think those are very different than what I was perceiving. I think, and this is very interesting. I think you're taking the approach of kind of like this is like a web page. I mean, it is a web page. You're building, but you think about all the metrics that go along with that, right? A successful web page has a number of users in it. There's a session attached to it. There's things you're clicking on, and as you were talking about that, I feel like there's a gap, right? We build the reports, we do the best we can to get the requirements, build it so people can use it, and then you kind of just publish it and you're done. Like, unless you have an intentional feedback loop from the user back to you, the report builder, you don't know how they're using it. You don't know if it's insightful. You kind of just kick it out there, and there's really not a whole lot of feedback loop unless you design that.
I'm actually a little more sensitive just based on the feedback and the experience I've heard from people too, where this is also a podcast where we've called a report anything but a report. We call it an application, we've called it a product, we've called it a website now. But I feel like we almost stray away from a report, and I think for good reason.
I wasn't
I
trying to call a report a website, just to clarify. I was just trying to make the analogy of
Yeah,
like you
but
do
right.
analytics on a website in the same way we should probably do analytics on the
Yes.
report. That I was trying to make the parallel there.
Yeah. Well, I agree. A
Okay.
report is not a website.
Yeah,
But
correct.
we're saying the experience though, right?
Yes.
And allow me to kind of clarify why I think we refer to other things is the old way of thinking of a report. I think the SSRS days is no longer applicable to what a Power BI report is. When you say give me a report, you could think of like just almost like a PDF or white paper, like a report providing something. But Power BI is really not that at all. And I think it falls more into that category. It falls almost more into a category that it could play into like a website or an application, because you can interact with it. You can actually change what it displays or
Mhm.
go to navigate to different pages. It allows you to do discovery, which usually reports never had that capability. And what I've seen from users is not so much that the visuals are right or wrong, but even if they have the right visual, it's their ability and their knowledge. So when I think experience, I think of a consumer's almost knowledge. Like, even if you have the best experience in a report, if the consumer does not perceive that or have that same experience, then who's to say that experience is actually a quality experience?
That is a very poignant comment you just made, at least for me, right? Because we talk about Power BI as an
Right.
application, but in reality, and I think why we spend so much time in UI UX or all of the things we do is you really are tailoring a report experience for somebody. And if to your point that you just said, if a consumer doesn't understand that, what happens is exactly what happened to me
Mhm.
this week, where we had an internal group that our team had been building some Power BI reports from. There have been some issues with them, not enough hours in a day, not enough manpower to support them. And one of the things that we had done recently for some quick wins was just deploy some report builder reports,
Mm.
just paginated reports. And out of nowhere, one of the top resources in that area reached out and they were like, I absolutely love what you're doing. And it's like it might like 10 years ago person, SSRS guy was like, no. They're like, yeah. But I can totally see it, because what we initially had built for them was, a very like an experience, right? Like you click on these things and you drill through and then it shows you the aggregations, but do you know how to consume that report? And we hadn't
Yeah.
spent time
Yeah.
with those people to teach them like all of the different things that they get out of this platform. And in reality, for some of the use cases, it was actually better or easier for them to just get the spreadsheet of information. So I think that is the distinction that we rarely or don't make when we're talking about Power BI. Is it is a vastly different experience, and part of not just the initial, but improving that user experience is treating it in such a way that you have to think about the end consumer all the time. Did you provide them enough information
Correct.
so that they can effectively use the report? I think we got so excited along this track, right? Because the amount of data that we can rip over, the insights that we get from simple visualizations, maybe we just missed the mark in here of teaching the like report consumer how do you navigate some of this stuff.
This goes back to, I think, so this, I think, touches on my point earlier, right? We do our best job to get requirements. We put something together and we give it back to people. And then without that feedback loop of like, hey, here's where we're at. Here's what we're doing. Did we hit the mark or not? I think that's really important. And I want to, man, there's so many points here. Go ahead. Go ahead, Tommy.
Sorry, I don't want to lose this because I feel like
Yeah, do it.
there's a direction here where this is more of a question, but I'll kind of state it. There's the wisdom of a crowd versus how do you actually get people to adopt an experience. Because if you were to say, and the wisdom of the crowd is basically the collective knows best, so don't question the collective. But if we're going to take that, let's say the SSRS or spreadsheets,
Yep.
everyone's used to spreadsheets.
Sure.
You would almost go down the theory of, well, since everyone's has a better experience in spreadsheets, therefore we should give them tables.
Yep.
Or should we kind of begin to adopt people to use the visuals? Because of course, someone's experience is going to be better right now if they're just using Power BI for the first time. Well, of course, they're going to have a better experience using tables and pivot tables because that's what they're used to.
Correct.
So I don't think we can just say, well, that audience should, if that audience likes that, then therefore we should just tailor completely there.
But would you agree that when you're asking for tables, you're automatically asking, the reason you're asking for tables, or the core reason, maybe there's other reasons, but I feel like the core reason you're asking for a table is because you're trying to integrate it with other data.
Yeah. Or,
Seth, would you agree? Like, do you think that's the primary reason why we see tables showing up?
Integrate with other data?
Yeah. I need a table so I can export it and I can get it to some other data that I have that you don't have in your data model that I may want to push together.
Yeah. But I'm gonna keep going down this path that
Okay.
I think Tommy started, right? Because if for a moment we're talking about people who know spreadsheets,
Yeah.
and we just upended their world because we spent a bunch of time taking raw data and building insightful things about that data.
Yeah.
We're taking that action from the information worker away from them, but I don't think we're doing a good job in terms of bringing them along for the ride, right? Like, are you thoroughly explaining like how you go from raw data to that insight?
Agreed. I totally agree with you.
And maybe that's why the knee-jerk reaction is
just give me my table
because I can verify it.
Well, I think it's part of that. Yeah. But I mean, I think that's, again, to Seth's point, right? If you've only known that's the direction you go with everything. And I think this is where, Tommy, I think you do a great job in your company where you're constantly, part of your publishing activity is doing a training video. Here's what you're like walking through each of the visuals and saying, here's what this visual is trying to accomplish. I think this speaks to part of the data culture, whether it's part of your client data culture or internal data culture. You're trying to explain, I have a lot of data. too much to put in a single table. I'm going to aggregate it to this, but this is the type of information. This is what we're trying to message to you on the output of this visual or a series of visuals, or this page is trying to tell you X, Y, Z. So we may have great thought, and we probably potentially put a lot more thought into what are the insightful pieces we're going to give to the end user, but we haven't communicated to them why what we're looking at, why we're looking at this chart. What is this trying to tell me?
And I think we forget we have to do a lot of hand holding, and we also, us in our space, I think we can take technology and kind of adapt to it. And I think we think other people are like that, where the technology will move people along. But that's not always the case, where people like their experience, they like how they're doing things. And the reason I say that is I don't want to have at my company anyone have the excuse where like, oh, I couldn't learn it or I didn't have the opportunity. I want their boss to say, well, there are office hours and power hours in the center of excellence in the road shows.
Yep.
How could you not learn? Like, I think we have an obligation, and I am a proponent of this, where I believe the Power BI professional has an obligation to help handhold. You can't just build a report and expect people to widely adopt to it and say, wow, this is just as amazing as you thought it was. I think especially if you're introducing it, you have to show the benefits. You got to sell it,
Yeah.
especially in the beginning. And for someone who's in finance or someone who's used to spreadsheets, that experience is only going to be good as their comprehension of what you can do in Power BI. Or to Seth's point, someone who's an information worker who does work more in spreadsheets, maybe you have to tailor a little more towards that. But at the same time, if you want people to have a good experience or have a quality experience in Power BI with drill through and clicky, draggy, droppy, you have to show them how to use it and the benefits of it in specific reports. You can't just show it like, look at all these features. Now you're adopted.
I totally agree with you. You can't throw
Right.
features at people and say you're good. I
Yeah.
don't think it works very well.
We moved on.
I do think one of the newer features actually helps us with the export problem, right? Like tabular models are great for aggregating data. Like they're not great for dumping out millions of rows of data into an Excel file, right? But
Yep.
that the new feature to export the table as is and keep the measures and everything else set up the way you're displaying it within the Power BI report, I think goes a long way in aggregating data to a point where as long as you clearly articulate the transform that you did or the output of that data, that kind of meets a middle ground for people who like to export or continue to work on, data in some ways.
Sure.
So love that, but
I'm gonna go. I'm not gonna. Well, rein me in here if I go too far off into the reservation here on this one. But I mean, when I think of, I'm trying to look at like, what do I do now? What are my patterns now that I do for reports versus what are patterns that I did when I first started building reports, right? Because I think I feel like I've matured or I've been able to learn or technique my way into better report building and better conveying of what are the insights we're trying to do and what visuals on the page represent those insights. So I feel like when I started out building reports, it was just a lot of visuals on a page. I wasn't really doing it. There wasn't maybe, I wasn't thinking about which pages had a specific topic, right? If I had an overview page and maybe some detail pages, but I didn't really have a journey, like the user journey. Like when you get to this page and you want to know more questions about this area of the report, you right click, drill through, or you go to click a button to go to the details of that object, whatever that may be. I don't think I really explained this story very well in there. So I think a lot more now what I do is adding more details to the visuals themselves. In the visual, what does this do? Adding the information, the help button, describing this chart shows this. You're expected to see this, this, and this. Kind of giving the expectations of what this visual will show. I think that's one technique that I use more now than I did when I first started building reports.
So the question, I agree with the statement. I'm not sure if there's a question in there, but no, I agree.
No question. That's just kind of like my observation of something that I've changed. Like another observation that I did, I think when I started out was I had too many visuals on one page.
Yeah, I had scroll.
I would load that sucker up because I was comfortable with having like 10 visuals on there, and I knew that these 3 visuals went together, and those 4 went together, and this other one was by itself, and there's my table so I can see the data, and like I was comfortable with a lot more visuals. but I had
Well,
been
everything
spending
was valuable, Mike.
everything's valuable.
Yeah.
And
No,
as a
I
user,
agree.
like I made the report, so I understood what was going on there. So I feel like in the same way, I don't do that much anymore. Like I feel like I put a lot less,
Mhm.
fewer visuals on the report page now because I don't want to overcomplicate things when I'm trying to show one or two things. I think
Right.
picking 3 or 4 insights is ideal for a single page. Any more than that, I mean, you can build a report page that does only one thing, and that's okay.
And people will clap if it's the right thing.
I mean, you can say this is the insight we're trying to show, and it's a single page for a single insight, one thing.
Right.
I think that's value added, but you have to explain why that page
Right.
is there and what you're using it for.
I think we all struggle with, if you see only 3 visuals, you're like, surely this can't be helpful to someone. Like, you
Correct.
have to almost like find the treasure chest, so to speak, in the numbers. So you have to have,
Hmm?
6 to 7 visuals. So look at the insight where someone may just want to see if your categories are below or above a certain threshold and why.
Correct.
And that may be just 3 visuals. To us, you're like, all this work I did to get the measure right, to get the data model right. It can't just come down to this. And I think we all struggle with that. But I agree with you. Where that experience with the labels, with how much we're actually displaying, you can overwhelm someone easy. And usually users are not going to take the time to like, well, let me dive into this and see what it's trying to say. If it's too much, it's too much.
I like the refinement conversation here, right? And I think it also speaks to some of like a previous podcast where we've talked about the before you start building the
Mhm.
report, right? How you're engaging with the business and having some of these conversations to wireframe and figure out what you want on a report page. And I think a lot of this conversation falls into that bucket and maybe afterwards too, right? But the more you take the report idea or what are the insights that somebody's asking for and bash those around in a room or talk those through with people to understand what is the most important part about seeing something in
Mhm.
the data. That, to Mike, to your point, I think gets you to how get people to focus in on the right things for some of the report needs,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And then you
Yep.
can simplify things on a page as opposed to where a lot of people go right off the bat is, well, I need to see everything. And
Correct.
it's,
Right.
well, it's not really true, right? Like the whole point of this exercise or working with teams that can analyze the data and your needs is to refine and simplify your life, right? As long as you know how we got there, and as long as like what are the key insights that you need. And we talk about that term a lot, right?
Yes.
Um, there's a lot of cases where you could just open up a simple, straightforward, well thought out report and get your answers as opposed to
Mhm.
spending the 15 minutes and go searching, hunting them down yourself.
100% agree with that one.
So to me, that raises the question of a new report for a user, or like, let's say you're in a Power BI app and there's a list of reports and you may have not seen those before. At what point, or let me see if I can phrase this question right, but
Hmm?
how much does it rely on the report itself for the user to comprehend that report? And how much does it rely on the professional to provide training or an introduction to that report? In terms of, especially, a pretty standard report like sales year to date, usually most people can understand that. But something different, maybe a little more subset to a team, should a report itself stand without any training at all, or should it be able to at all times? Or do reports require supplemental education or supplemental information to help a user? Because when I think experience,
Great question.
I honestly think that for the most part, like a good report can kind of stand on its own. But I think for truly a good experience, you have to have that other side of it. Like, I don't think any report can really survive, or not survive, but thrive without a roadshow, or without some education around it. So,
I'd
question.
agree.
I'm gonna throw down just go ahead, Seth. Sorry.
No, I totally agree with that. And in fact, like while you were talking, I kind of had a different idea too, which is in reports themselves. Like Mike and I, we always put like at like a tab in there with a whole
Mhm.
bunch of the interactions and things that you use in a report to
Hmm.
like show people how they would do a drill through, or like some of the features that you embedded that they may not know,
Mhm.
like that would be one. But
Right.
overall, when you said app, it strikes me that we're creating almost this repository of reports that um it almost makes sense to me to create an index report,
Mm.
right? One that
Oh.
shows you
Oh.
all of the reports and maybe links to them or their back pages to, like, say, hey, I think you always have to assume that new users are going to come into
Hmm?
the fold, and like an app's going to get shared with them and they're going to be like, I have no idea what I'm looking at. But if there's the top header, you know report in there that says, here's what's in this app, boom, and then they have that explanation, as opposed, then you have a single place for all the reports to add, as opposed to adding that in every single report. I think that'd be super useful.
I
But
like
like,
that.
that's the type of
I
thing
actually
that,
really
like,
like that.
yeah, I think you have to plan always for someone who has no idea what that report is about. And that's why, you know, part of, I think, refining or building a better user experience that Mike, alluded to, is adding a lot more information icons.
Yep.
Um, and, as I'm talking, is there a way you could simplify that experience in a
Right.
particular workspace and centralize that in like maybe a main page, or report or something like that? I don't know. um, but tons of, I think, different options for you to pursue, especially related to quick links to a video,
Right.
or
Yeah.
Yep.
like having somebody do a 5-minute walkthrough on a report probably serves 10 times the purpose of having somebody try to read and understand something that they're not familiar with.
Those are some of the so when we built the layouts for Power BI tips, one of the things we built in a layout was, here's a single page of the design features of this layout. Potentially you could use, here's how to do a drill through, here's how to use expand and contract on the table visuals, right? So we basically built a 5 or 6 videos around these very basic features that you would use in Power BI Desktop. They were generalized, they were not for a specific report, but you could at least go watch the video about how to use that feature. And I think Microsoft, while they do a great job of building the application, I don't think there's a really good like new user introductory, like,
Right.
here's how your report runs, and here's all the little features that you can use in this report, and here's how to make them work, right? Drill up, drill down is not actually very intuitive. So you actually kind of need to educate the users of the report for those pieces. I really like the idea of having like supplemental videos, or Tommy, I think your idea of having the roadshow for the report
Yeah.
is very good. I think I've adopted now, especially from these conversations, right? We have this conversation now around, well, how do you know when it's time to like turn on, like, when do people know the report's there? Like, what's in the report? And I think that bodes very well with Seth's idea of, hey, there's always going to be a new user coming in. We have to be mindful of that audience all the time. And in addition to that, keep pushing people, like, how are we going to keep educating people that have never seen this before about what we're doing?
Right. And actually, I really like the idea too, because I think we've always focused with the road shows. And for those who are not listening, have no idea what a road show is. We're not selling. Well, we are selling, but basically, what we do whenever we launch a report, we work with a stakeholder and we say, okay, we're gonna launch this report next week, and that's when people get access to it. Who needs to get access, or what's the audience, like the greater audience? We'll send out a link, a webinar like Zoom or Teams, and we basically do an hour presentation, like 30 minutes on, or 40 minutes, where 20 minutes is like introducing, like always show something, like here's what Power BI is for those who are new. And then we ask the stakeholder, can you give me 3 demos that will really benefit the users here? Like if it's a top accounts report or something like that, it's like, what accounts should we look at? It's like, okay, so I'm Kevin, and my sales region is the Northeast, and I want to see what my top accounts are in the tri-state area. This is how I do that. And then, I'm Johnny, and I'm located in Chicago, and I want to see the Midwest, units being sold. This is how I do that. And we actually show those real life examples rather than just clicking around
Yeah.
for the people who are watching. Now, what I really like though is, because that's usually pretty long and we always post to it, but again, people are selfish, and we have if one thing we've all agreed on, where users are selfish. I'm not going to watch a 45-minute report, video on explaining a report. Even myself, if
Well,
you
you,
know,
you said users are selfish. I don't think they're selfish. I think they're lazy. I think
Okay,
people in
cool.
general just try and find the
Just
path.
one.
I'm lazy.
Yeah,
I'll admit it.
yeah,
Like I'm trying to find the path of least resistance no matter what I'm
right.
doing. Like if I can do it, if I would rather spend a little bit more time doing one thing to then never have to do it again, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like that's where I'm at. But that's
And the
also probably
outlook we
part of
have on society.
that's probably part of my mindset as an engineer,
Yeah,
right? I love,
sure.
I've learned 5S and like
Right,
the techniques that are like if you pick it up, put it back where you got it from.
right. Well,
So
I'm not gonna watch a 45. The only time I'm gonna watch a 45-minute video, says the person doing a 45-minute
I
podcast.
was gonna
You
say,
know,
I was gonna say, Tommy, I think you're killing our audience here, Tommy. This is
yeah,
not good.
yeah.
I don't know.
We're gonna do the explicit measures 5-minute
A 5 minute
summary.
podcast. Well, people's our attention are short
Right.
though.
Yeah, but especially if I'm a user, like again, I don't for people watching this, obviously there's a direct benefit for someone watching, like at their job who's in sales.
Yep.
I don't need to watch a 45-minute video like with our roadshows. So I love the idea of
Sure.
linking to a catalog of your 2 to 5 minute video on, hey, here's our top accounts report. Here's how to use it. Here's
Mhm.
the benefits. Cool.
Yeah.
Or embed it. But that idea too, because again, the question my ace in the hole before I want to get back to, because I think it's so vital to this conversation. Is it the user's fault that they don't have a good experience, or is it our fault? And I'll always go back to or struggle with this, because I think even if I say, hey, we did road shows and we have a center of excellence and we have, we do these power hours and office hours, and a user still doesn't have a good experience, is that my fault or is that their fault? And I think I have to provide every which way and every avenue for someone to learn about a report. It's part of my job.
Yep.
And I can't just say we did this one thing, therefore everyone should adopt that.
All right, I'm gonna challenge you there a little bit on that, Tommy, though.
Okay.
So what I will ask you then is, if that's part of your job, how do you quantify that?
Quantify people actually adopting.
How do you quantify that you're doing what you like? You're like, what are your maybe 2 or 3 metrics that you look at to make sure, like you said, I'm gonna test, like you try things, right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna try the roadshow. Did that produce value? I'm gonna try short video documentation.
Right.
Did that produce value? Like, what have you tried, and then
Mhm.
what, like, how do you quantify it? And then like what, at the end of the day, I'm thinking like, well,
Right.
Tommy's the BI guy, so at the end of the day, this should roll up to some sort of Tommy's quarterly goals
Right.
to say,
Yeah.
here's what I'm
You're
doing.
taking time.
Exactly.
It takes time to do all this.
It totally
So,
does.
yeah. And no, I agree. So I think we've talked about this before, where there's like indirect and direct ways. I would say a direct way that we do it is we do provide a quarterly feedback survey. And we do this report specific, and we kind of do that in general. And one of the things we do is basically, how do people perceive their experience in Power BI? Where any report survey or feedback, we always ask the general, like, I know how to navigate content in Power BI.
I love
I
that
perceive
idea.
yeah, and we do that, and then we always do that specifically to the report.
Yep.
So we'll measure that, and we'll kind of see, is that actually improving? One, also we look at two, not just the quality score, but how many people are filling out the survey.
Sure.
So let's say you only get three. Well, maybe people, this is not on their top of mind. And obviously there's things to do, but we look at the number of people who are filling it out. And then we look at those quality scores around, I can navigate the content. We even do like
Mhm.
the frequency, like, so how often do you do these items in Power BI? Search, Power BI apps, favorites, bookmarks, comments. And we kind of gauge those for things that we're teaching to see, are those actually improving over time?
Mhm.
The other thing we do too is, this is more the indirect way, but listen, me and my BI team, we're the people who get how many people are asking us how to do things. So there's kind of like a behavior thing too, where you just look at the number of messages, like how many times are people asking us for certain things. One thing we're going to incorporate we just launched the new Jira help desk, is how many people are asking for support and access.
Hmm.
And is that dropping? So I would say those, I don't think those are all perfect. Like if those numbers go up,
Yep.
you're doing a better job, but I think that's a good, at least, indication. And then I think, as part, if we're doing all the stuff, is the overall 30-day usage growing up. Another metric we have is our 30-day rolling views and number of users. So active users and usage over 30 days.
Like those questions.
So
It's an interesting one. I think you're far ahead in terms of internal report tracking and usage. I think you could also do things like make sure that your onboarding practices within your organization
Mhm.
streamline people getting
Right.
a license or access to the reports that
Yeah.
are relevant to their area, which you could track via like Azure AD groups, right? If you've set up things in that way. But then to your point, Tommy, like it'd be an interesting exercise to build some automation around in a report around tracking new folks coming into the organization and usage within the reports,
Yeah.
because then you get direct feedback of, well, if you're providing value, they're going to be in your system using your reports, right?
Right.
To some degree. But I do like the other things you're doing as far as surveys and just in general. But yeah, I've always wanted to spend a chunk of time in the admin APIs and pull some of the data out of the systems. I just haven't had time.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna give you an accelerator on this topic because I think this is actually very relevant to what we're talking about. I was just talking with Alex Dupler about some interesting things that Microsoft has been pushing out. There's actually a Microsoft Power BI Git repo called Power BI Data Access Auditing. And I was looking through some of the information that you can go get out of this. Holy smokes. There's some pretty doggone good stuff in there. So if you can imagine, for me, again, I'm talking about auditing to see if your usage is going up or down. This thing will this is basically turning on audit logs for Power BI. What that does is by user, it shows you every visual and every query each visual ran for each user.
Really.
So you can kind of, so there's a lot of information there. There needs to be a lot more parsing that kind of goes along with it. But at a high level, you can know which users are using which visuals on a report, which is something we've never really had before. But there's a lot of data coming out, and potentially, depending on how large your company is, I mean, you're talking, gigabytes of queries and
Yeah.
information that can come back out of this.
You better have good titles.
Right.
You better,
Hey,
yes.
Then you can butt your survey results up against reality, Tommy.
Bingo.
Right.
Kevin, stop lying to me.
Yeah, and you
You're
can,
not using my reports at all. You don't even know what to do.
and you can see
company-wide email. Here's who. Yeah.
So you can see some interesting things too. You can also see who's connecting to the data models using MDX, meaning who's connecting to the data models
wow.
using Excel. So you can also see who's ripping out large amounts of information, and all the queries, every query for every visual comes with timings. So you can see, hey, so-and-so's running this MDX query, which is coming from Excel, meaning they're grabbing a lot of table data. What is that doing to my data model, and how long is it taking the model to run or execute that query? And now you can start having conversations. Like, we're now able, so this is, to me, this is the first time that I've seen like the other side of the world. Like, we can actually consume at a detailed level, like what people are clicking on, what they're doing, what's being highlighted in that report. And as Alex Dupler and I were talking, right, if you really spent some time on this, you could actually go back through and say, okay, over a 30-day window period of time, you could unparse those queries and figure out what are all the measures that are being used, what are all the columns that are being used. And so if you think about it, if you look at the query that is run for the visual, that will contain all the measures that you need. And so the only thing you need left is like the dependency tree of, okay, if I call this measure, that measure will have 2 other dependencies. So you could technically go back from these reports and unwind and rebuild, like, okay, what is actually needed in the data model, which columns are being used and which ones are not based on this information. So there's a lot more there. I think there's going to be some neat solutions in the future that are going to get better at doing this, but I'll drop the link in here into the chat window because this is, I think, a very powerful part of the program, and it's an example from Microsoft.
That's a blog post, so that's a full day session.
That's actually
audit in a day.
That's there's a lot more to that than just there's a lot more than just a day, or like that is a lot of work that you can get together. But the fact that there's a GitHub repo that already kind of accelerates some of this, right? Now it's just a matter of turning on the feature, and there's actually a report they give you that if you point your report at the Kusto environment, it'll spit out at least some insights about what's going on. So someone's already started the workload for you.
Right. Yeah, one Power BI session you'll never see is adoption in a day. Or if you do, don't go to it. Waste of money. No, but
waste of money. I love it.
Waste of money. But the idea though that audit though, I mean, I think to be able to parse all that information, but to make sense out of it too.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Yeah.
there's this is the quintessential problem, right? With all these automated systems that are doing things for us, like there's just this is why I think anyone who's picking a career mode, if you pick data career, you're golden
You're
because
set.
we're all these automated things are making more and more data over and over again. Like you're just gonna be washed in more and more information.
Right.
You've got to get better at better of how to transform it and clean it. And I don't think there's going to be there's no lack of data at this point, and it's just going to keep exponentially growing.
So we've talked about a lot of different areas for experience. Let me ask you guys, where would you start? Like, so let's say you had a concussion or you just kind of blanked out or you're at a new company, a new client, and you're trying to understand report experience, people understanding the reports. Is it the visuals? Is it the numbers? How do you know where to prioritize your time for improving experience? Kind of, if you want to give me kind of your synopsis of how would you know where to prioritize?
So I think I start off, Tommy, kind of using one of your ideas here. I think surveys are underrated. Ha ha ha. And maybe that's a pun. I don't know. But I think surveys would be
I don't think
useful
so.
to get the climate of what people are doing in the organization.
Yeah.
And I think just producing a survey of what do you like. There's a couple things that can be handled with a survey. What's your confidence in the data? What are the reports that you use regularly? What are where do you feel like the reports need more help or don't need more help, or do you understand where to find reports? Just some simple questions. And I think you can get a climate of like I think I'm coming into this is you can't change what you don't measure, I guess is what it would be, right? So I would start with some kind of general survey, figure out where the climate of the data culture is, and then I think from there I would start looking at, okay, there's a couple paths you can go. I think training and education to the team, I think is a easy win. I think that's something you can do. I think again, I do training a lot for people anyways who are using this environment, so I think that's just a big value because people just don't know what they don't know, and they don't have time to learn new things all the time. So if you can make it easier for them to absorb and do new things, I think you take the survey results and then you figure out where do people need more help, and then you start there and you start working down that path. That's kind of where I would start with. Seth, where do you think you'd start?
I think it depends on the size of the organization. I have pros and cons between just surveys, right? So I guess the things I would do is probably focus on the areas of business that utilize Power BI the most and the least, and do feedback sessions that kind of provides a value hook on top of it. Like, hey, if you come to this, you're gonna, it's valuable to you for this reason, but use it as more of a brainstorming session to figure out, like, for the group that loves the reports and gets a lot of use out of them, like what things would they improve on it? Like what things do they love about it? What are, so pros and cons, challenges and easy parts, and then go to the opposite spectrum of like areas that don't use it much or are struggling with understanding it and using it. Why are those? And you can kind of get a litmus between, whether it's those two and maybe a third or something, across the org, because those conversations, I think, elicit a lot of the small things as a BI developer that you'd be like, oh, okay, I get it. Like if I added an information button here, right, like that clarifies a ton of stuff. Or everybody's saying the same thing and I'm missing an index on reports, or they have no idea where they're supposed to go, or it's the common
Yeah.
themes in conversation that provide a lot more value to me than just a survey. But at the same time, like maybe the survey is like how finding the area business that is going to be the ones that you spend more time in. But
I think
ultimately it's the same thing we do with discovery. The proof is in the conversation, and it's the little things that you pick up as a BI person that are going to lead you towards directionally just some things that you might want to start fixing across the board.
I think the reason I'm saying survey here a little bit, I mean, I think you probably maybe you add, I like the idea of having a feedback session, but if you do a feedback session once a year or twice a year or once a quarter, it's going to be much more difficult for you to quantify improvements to that feedback session, I think, quarter to quarter. And I think that's why I like the idea of the survey slightly a bit more, is because I can actually write a survey, send it out, and then do another one. and then see, did I get more responses? Do I have, or if we're doing the 1 to 7 scales on some of those questions, am I in general moving the sentiment in the right direction? So I think you still probably do both of these, right? I would probably hone in on the feedback sessions, and those would be like, yeah, we need to do that because that's just general information that we need to know. But either I follow that or precursor that with a survey to see what people are actually, in the whole of the company or across departments, what is the sentiment of what's going on here? And I think there's probably, to your point, Seth, the business areas that struggle, I want to see the Venn diagram. I want to see the Venn diagram of like what areas are finding value and what are the things they're saying versus what are the departments that are not finding value and what are they saying. And my guess here is part of that conversation would be around data governance. I don't trust the data. I don't understand what's in there. I don't know how to calculate. I don't understand the tools. Like I think that would probably be part of that output of that conversation. If I'm guessing.
And isn't that always the case? You go in like, hey, let's say I understand your experience with reports, and it goes right into data governance. You're like, oh, this is bigger than I thought. But I agree. But I think at the end of the day, they're all kind of intertwined. You can't just improve the visuals and put an information bar and a how-to on the report if people don't trust what a lead is. So
Tommy, you walked right into data governance right there. You just said data governance.
That's what. No, you.
Right. But in terms of like user experience, right?
Yeah.
That's a data quality thing.
Yeah.
Right? Like if you're
totally,
that's going to be a consistent across the board.
Right.
I guess the user experience improvements and enhancements, though, which is the topic of the conversation, I guess falls into what are those standard things you could just have as part of the template. And continually improving the same thing, so you're creating that consistent experience across the organization.
Yeah,
and in such a way that it's going to be like meaningful. Like if everybody's saying, I have no idea what calculations you're doing, well, you might want to produce some information, right?
Well, exactly, 100%.
So it's those types of things that I think are very relevant for the types of like these conversations. The other thing is like it's also going to point out for the business areas, right? Like say all you've spent your time on is sales and marketing. Those reports are likely going to look a lot different than finance, right?
Totally.
And the want for Excel or dumps or data and granular information, et cetera, is going to be much higher in one area. But if your template is all high level, you're not going to get a lot of user adoption in the other area. So this would point out that like, hey, maybe your overall adjustments need to be made in how you're producing reports for people.
And I think just as important are the feedback surveys. I'll agree, those discovery sessions, man, if you ask the right questions, you can get a really good idea. And of course, people say, well, we don't trust the data, but we've said that we proposed this question before to users, or kind of like the framework of, imagine you had 10 business analysts working on this and $1 million. What does your team look what's that experience for you in a year looking at data? And from there, you can really, I think there's golden nuggets out of that, where you can really begin where they want to be and what kind of experience they want. So that to me is always kind of like the golden nugget question, or the golden, whatever you want to call it. But
the golden nugget.
Are we coining a new term?
I like this. Let's go with this one. Okay, it's the golden goose nugget question. There we go.
I think you need to refine that a little bit. Work on your user experience.
Work on your terminology.
I didn't quite track on that one. I need
more
information.
I don't understand, Tommy. I don't understand. I understand golden goose and I understand nugget, but that doesn't make sense.
We call it lightning in a can, guys.
Lightning in a can. I like it. Let's just mix all of the is it an idiom? Is that what they call them? Like mix all the terms together, kick the farm instead of kick the bucket.
I abbreviated. I'm done.
I get a really good, interesting question here from YouTube from Mark. What happens when Power BI shows that existing reports are having archaic errors? I would love, those are conversations that I enjoy, right? Those are the ones that I like. I love looking at those, because where I've typically seen this is one of the reasons why I really like Power BI and data modeling. When I write the sum of an equation or a sum of a column, it doesn't matter. The numbers add up the right way every time. Now, more complicated DAX equations, you have to be careful with those because you have to make sure they're adding up correctly. But like, just in Excel, I can't remember the number of times. I mean, I think if you look at the statistics, and people have studied this, over like 75% of Excel sheets have errors in them somewhere for like, because you change them,
Really?
like, and it's
Yeah.
every single formula for every single row. So you will find areas where if you build a data model, it will, in some areas, it will act more consistently than if you had just moved the data around inside Excel. So I think it's a really good point to make
No,
there. And you
we've
want those
used
kind of
that, yeah.
questions.
We've used that to our advantage. We introduced a new report that was kind of like the insightful sales report, and you had all these salespeople going, "Well, that's not that cut. You know, why are their sales saying 12 million for USA? That's not right." And then you show like, well, because you have that account assigned to the USA, therefore it's showing up the USA
Yeah,
in
exactly.
CRM.
Yeah.
So,
You
and
gotta
so we kind of,
you have
yeah.
some data quality issues. And again,
So,
now we're right back to data
Right.
governance.
My gosh, it always goes back, doesn't it? But we actually use we said the first 3 months were supposed to be like this launch the report, but then we said we're going to use this report, and we had a stakeholder, we had an
Vet it out.
executive, yeah,
Vet out the
and they
data.
said, yeah, it's like you better look at your region to see if everything's matching.
Yep.
And that's what we use the report for, and that's
Yeah.
what sales did. So
like that.
because we realized that they're like, hey, why is the government of Pakistan located in Kentucky?
You never know.
Yeah.
You might be investing in new areas.
I think the largest failing with CRM systems is they didn't put checks and balances in for people fudging stuff.
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
it's not in you,
But
yeah.
But doesn't that mean that's
This
kind of like
quarter.
this is the core of what we talked about this, like, in here, like people are lazy and they will find a way. If they can't get it to work the way they expect it to, they're gonna finesse it and let's put this extra little bit of data in this
True.
one column. Let's put these two columns of data together in one text field, and then we'll parse it later. Like
Right.
people are trying to get to the answer. They're doing the right thing to try and find solutions, and sometimes it just kind of comes out the wrong way, and people abuse data systems when they're not supposed to be used that way, potentially.
Yeah, I think our conclusion is you want a good experience in Power BI. There's the overarching theme of data governance at all times, and it's looking at you. And if you
It's staring at you.
staring at you,
It's like those pictures on the wall that you walk across and the eyes are always looking at you no matter which way you go.
that's data governance. Yeah,
That's your data governance.
you're trying to paint, but it's still looking.
It's still looking at you.
It knows.
Creepily watching you. Awesome. I think this is a pretty good break point. I think we have some really good takeaways here. I think, in general, this is not a one and done solution. I don't think you can just go around and say, yeah, we're done. We've improved the user experience, like, bar none. Like, I think it's just a progression. I think you have to figure out what works in your business. I think we threw out a couple techniques here, some across the chat here that you can kind of pluck and pick on your own. But in general, I think this is a really relevant topic. And, feel free to share it or tweet us or chat things if you have other techniques that you use that you find valuable in your organization. We'd love to hear what you're saying about it. Feel free to comment on it. We'll be watching all of the social media areas, and we'll grab and reply on some of those comments as well. Well, thank you all for listening to the Explicit Measures podcast. We are going to try to continue to do better at technology. It always fights us all the time. I guess if it were easy, everyone would do it, I guess is what I would say. So it's not as easy as I thought, apparently. But thank you all for listening. For those of you who stuck it out with us, if you enjoy the Explicit Measures podcast, our only ask is just share that you enjoyed the podcast with somebody else, either on your team or send someone a message like, hey, if you're talking about Power BI things, here's a fun podcast to listen to these three goofballs talk about stuff, and I learned something, or maybe not. You never know. But if you're listening or looking for the podcast, Tommy, where can you find the podcast?
You can find the podcast anywhere they are available, Apple and Spotify. If you want to listen to all of our previous now 65 episodes, if you want to watch live, YouTube and LinkedIn, make sure to follow myself and Power BI Tips when links change. And just
Correct.
in case technology changes. So if you see a 5-second video, odds are we're working.
We broke it. We totally broke it.
We totally broke it, but we're trying hard to get something else out there.
We'll recover. So we were a little bit late today, but thank you all for bearing with us. With that, thank you all very much. We appreciate you. The community Power BI has been a lot of fun, and you are a great bunch of people. We appreciate it. Keep contributing, and we'll see you next time.